and it doesn't allow people to find out all the details or all the facts or what the human component is of this. All it gives them is the sound bites and the biblical quote. It doesn't tell them, Paul and Todd, who live with a cat, and raise tropical fish, and just want to be able to walk down the street wearing our wings. So.
Good. Do you guys plan on having kids or wanting to adopt or?
We have talked about that. Right now, Paul is downsized to Kodak, and he's gone back to school, so he's a full-time student. And I work at a local not-for-profit agency called the Gay Alliance to the Genesee Valley. And so we're living on my meager income and student loans right now. But we have talked about having a family. We both love children. There are a lot of children who need homes. And I think we would make great dads. And I think it would be a wonderful experience for us to be parents together. And it'd be very rewarding for us to open up our home and bring a child or children in. So it definitely is a possibility. We just we would like the stability of marriage to kind of anchor our family more, so that we would feel more security. And there's also some issues around adoption and then having to do a second parent adoption, which is a much muddier process than if you're married and you can just do one adoption as a couple, as opposed to having to individually adopt a child, and the added expense that involves. So there is, additional frustration and aggravation involved. But in the end, I know it would be worth it.
Yeah, I want my child to be able to say, "This is my dad's," not "This is my dad's plus all the paperwork that proves it." I want him to just be able to walk around and say, "These are my dad's."
And what I always want people to remember is love is what makes a family. And families take many forms, whether it's a single parent family or a grandchild growing up with his grandparents or another family that's taken a child in. I mean, what's important is that a child be in a safe, stable, loving, nurturing environment. That the gender of the parent or the number of parents really isn't going to determine the well-being of that child. It's the environment that child is raised in. And, and some of the other families you've interviewed have children or are starting families. And the couples I know who have brought children into their family are very well adjusted. They're thriving because these families have had to work really hard to overcome obstacles. These children are wanted, and they receive all kinds of love and nurturing and attention. Any child could be so lucky as to have parents who want them so much.
Well, I want to thank you, Todd and Paul, for talking to us today.
Hi, welcome to TV Dinner. I'm John Greenbaum from Metro Justice, and we're speaking today with Tanya Smolinski, who is the Operations and Development Director of Metro Justice. Tanya, welcome.
Thanks.
We'll be talking to many people today about the issue of same-sex marriage in New York State. So Tanya, right now in New York State, only people who are opposite-sex couples can get married.
Yeah.
So why not just keep doing things the way they are?
Yeah. Yeah, I think why it personally is meaningful to me, I need to take you back to when I was a kid. Not that I was thinking about equal marriage then or even being gay, but as all children, we grow up with sort of this idea that we're going to have a family. I mean, it's such a given when you think about kids, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. One of the primary things is, one day I'm going to have a family, just like the family I'm growing up in. And you take that so for granted, you don't even think about it. It's something, a part of just how you perceive life. So, as a child, I always figured I'll have a family. And virtually every kid I knew talked about having a family. So it was just such a given. And other things that are just such a given. I mean, sort of the right to have a house, kids play, they have a house. One day I'm going to have a house like mommy and daddy. That you're going to have a job, that you're going to, all these things. You think about it. It's sort of like the American dream, and you're given that. And as a kid, you never question that. You never question the idea that I'll have a family along with everybody else. And it wasn't until I hit high school and started to be introduced to history that whole notion that we all are sort of equal, and we all have the same rights, and we're all, put on this earth, basically, in a sense that we all are entitled to find our own happiness. The Constitution, I took all that in. And in high school, when I started to take history classes, social studies at that time, and started to learn about different groups of people who didn't have those rights at one point in our history. You know, I remember reading about women and how, for example, in the 19th century, if their husband decided to divorce them, because they couldn't initiate a divorce, but if their husband decided to divorce them, they had no custody of their children. That really shocked me. I mean, it was just like, I almost had to reread it over and over and say, women who were divorced from their husband had no custody to their children. Similarly, they could lose their house because they were not entitled to own property. And I just was like shocked. And then I learned, of course, about slaves, African Americans, who similarly, you know, when they were slaves, they were the property of the slaveholder. So that means that slaveholders could just decide to sell off the children or divide the husband and wife. And again, I was shocked. Because what it really sort of came down to, I suddenly like made this realization that I had been fed this idea that when our country was founded, the whole idea of America was because we wanted our rights. We all were going to be granted these rights. And suddenly I realized that there were groups of people, actually if you add them up, women and African Americans, the majority of people really didn't have these basic rights about creating a family that's going to be protected, about owning property, all these things. And I remember thinking to myself when I was in high school, I was like, you know, if I had been born in the 19th century, I definitely would have been an abolitionist. Or had I been born when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were fighting for women's rights, I definitely would have been a part of that movement. I mean, it was just like, absolutely. I was so like, you know, first it was horrified and then it was enraged. And, you know, I would be there. And then I think, in a sense, by the time I got to college, it was like, there was sort of a relief. And I sort of bought into the fact that was history. And that's not true anymore. Thank God. You know, indeed, you know, we do have our rights. African Americans are not going to lose or be divided up as a family. Women are not going to be divorced by their husband and lose their children. You know, I had this idea, and then suddenly when I came out as a lesbian, I started to realize, wait, I'm part of that group now. That's happening now. What I read about in the 19th and early 20th century, and when you think about the civil rights movement, that's what I'm living now. And it really like angered me, and just that sort of, I don't know how to explain to people, when you grow up and you believe you have these basic rights, to suddenly be told you don't, it's just mind-blowing. And so that was what I was going through, that in the, you know, I came out in the late 80s. Here we are in the 20th century, and I don't have this basic right to create a family. And I just had a hard time wrapping my brain around that. And then, of course, you know, when people started to talk about equal marriage, I mean, yes, we need that. Now, I will say that, you know, I've been partnered now for 10 years. And when my partner and I had a commitment ceremony and realized that we didn't have those rights, what we did was we went to a lawyer and we spent, I mean, hundreds of dollars to make sure that at least we were protected. We had a healthcare proxy, which allows me, if something were to happen to my partner, I can make medical decisions for her and vice versa. Similarly, all our assets, our house, everything we have in savings, all that stuff is protected. In other words, nobody's going to step in and take it away from us. So we, you know, but can you see that? That was a middle class. I got to do that because I'm middle class and I have the money to pay for a lawyer and I have access to resources. And similarly, I have a lot of friends right now who are having children together in a partnership, and they too, you know, will spend quite a bit of money to make sure there's a second parent adoption. Thank God in Monroe County we can do that. But again, that is a middle-class luxury.
Right, and all these rights that you're talking about, myself and my wife, automatically we share these rights.
Exactly.
So in effect, you're being taxed. You're paying a special gay tax, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, we are. And I don't want to shift from the point I was going to make, is that it's a luxury that middle-class people have, but the people who don't have that right to even have a second parent adoption or protect their property, people who could lose their children, people who can lose their house, are working class people and poor people. And disproportionately, again, they're African American and women.